is it the case that the best poker players are the ones that are able to, at the right time, play really suboptimally or really unorthodox?
Yeah, specifically, there's one guy who last year sort of took the poker world by storm, and his name was Michael Adamo. And he was doing things, like I said, most of the top pros play very similarly with the way that they, construct ranges and their bet sizing and all these kind of things. He was doing some crazy things that nobody else was doing. So he studied, sort of a different form of poker, and it was unorthodox, and it throws people off because he's in his comfort zone with these bet sizes and different things, whereas everyone else, they're not well studied in those spots. So as a result of him being unorthodox, he became like a monster and very difficult to play against because he really knew what he was doing with it.
In tournament or cash games?
It was tournaments, yeah. He was crushing tournaments. He was going against the norm in terms of what is like, this is what you should do as a poker player in this spot. He wasn't doing that. He was doing what he thought was best, and he was doing things outside the norm that, again, in a vacuum, you could look at that and you go, that's incorrect. Yeah. That he should not do. That is a clear-cut mistake. Even, the solvers or the computers or game theory would say, this is wrong, what he's doing. But it's not wrong if he's doing it in a way that he's exploiting other players' tendencies. So, for example, with him, say he's playing far too aggressively, okay? That's not good unless your opponents are playing way too passively. So if your opponents are playing passively, the answer is to be more aggressive with them. And that's, I think, one of the biggest advantages he had was he was willing to do that.
So bet big pots, bluffing.
Huge. So in a spot where somebody would make it 1,000, he's making it 22,000. Like, what? What is this? This makes no sense.
And then people kind of know he has nothing, but they're too afraid to call him on it.
Well, and then sometimes what happens is, this is where the leveling comes in. You're like, oh man, this guy's crazy. He's bluffing like nuts. Then he bets to 22,000 and you say, I'm taking my stand. I call. And then he shows you like, four of a kind or something like that. Yeah. So he gets people out of their comfort zone. And I really enjoy watching him play. He's probably my favorite player to watch today.
Watching a guy like that, what aspect of his play have you been able to incorporate into your own? Like, what do you learn from that? Because you're constantly learning, you're constantly adjusting.
Yeah. Well, no, and I love it. And as I said, so I think a lot of players sort of come to the same conclusions about this is how you play the spot, but he doesn't. And I love watching and thinking in terms of like why he's doing this. Yeah. And one specific thing, for example, is he's willing to really go for it. So in a spot where, let's say he bets 2,000, he knows he'll get you to call 2,000, right? But he wants it all. He wants it all. So he says, you know what? I'll give up the 2,000 that's guaranteed, and I'll bet 50,000. And maybe if you call that, now, so listen, you lose the 2,000 7, 8 times, but if I get called for the 50 just once, I'm profiting from that. And it also sets the, the template for you to really sort of be a player that people are afraid to play against. He knocked me out in a tournament very early on in a huge event. And he was so far ahead. He was one step ahead of my thought process in a hand. And he did something that makes no sense whatsoever. I looked it up on the computer. Huge mistake, if you will. But not a mistake because he was taking advantage of my tendency.
Do you remember the cards? Is there an example?
I remember the whole thing. Yeah, I remember it like it was yesterday.
Can you take it like through an example hand that really demonstrates it?
So I'll explain the hand here. So I'm on the button, and I have ace king, which is a very good hand. And I raise, and he calls from the big blind. The flop is 9-7-5, so I have nothing really here. He checks, I check behind. The turn card's an ace. He checks. I bet half the pot. There were 6,000 in there. I bet 3,000. Okay? Now, this is not a typical thing you see people do, but he raised me to 36,000. Massive raise. Bigger than the size of the pot.
What was the flop again?
9-7-5.
Okay.
Turn an ace.
So what is he representing exactly?
Well, he could have a straight. He could have three of a kind. He could have, aces up. He could have a whole bunch of hands. So he check raises me big to 36,000. I call the bet. So now there's something like 75,000. The river is a 5. So the board pairs. Okay. He thinks for a while and he bets all of it, which is 3 times the pot. He bets 225,000. There's only 75,000 out there, right? And in theory, he should never, ever have a hand that can do that, right? So it confused me. And I was like, okay, well, this guy's aggressive. He likes to bluff and all this kind of stuff. So I made the call with the ace king. And he turned over 6-8. So he had a straight. But here's the thing. In theory, that river card is bad for him. When I call the turn, I have a lot of the time 3 of a kind, 2 pair that just made a full house. So he was risking that. And the reason he did it was because he thought I would perceive him to be bluffing a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So he just went for it. And it worked. He was able to double up right away and knock me out of the tournament like an hour in.
Do you think he thought you might fold? Like what is
I think it came down to this. It's as simple as this. He was cognizant of his image as being a wild, aggressive bluffer, right? And he was fully taking advantage of me, knowing that my tendency in these spots is to be curious. And I want to call and I want to see it. So he was fully taking advantage of the fact that he thought I would call too often. Because otherwise, his play makes no sense. A small bet, a medium-sized bet, those make sense. But the bet that he made, in theory, is indefensible. It's just like clearly a mistake. But that's why poker's so fascinating, because he makes this play, and it wasn't a mistake. It was above the rim, is what it was.
Do you think he put you on ace something?
I think exactly what he thought I had was ace king or something like that. You know?
That is so fun. That is so fun that the two players at such a high level were able to mess with each other's mind. How old is he? Is he young?
He's in his 20s, yeah.
I feel like that takes a lot of guts to take risks like that.
Well, that's what's great about him. He's certainly never accused of not having the guts to put it in. And that's scary to play against, right? Yeah. The easiest opponent to play against is one who's just straightforward, passive, not wild and crazy. Playing against him, he's going to put you in the blender, as we say.